Welcome to GFN Gaming, I'm Russ, and in today's game, we're going to revisit Deadzone by Mantic Games for another grid-based skirmish battle. In today's game, I'll be running the Veer-Myn because they're Veer-Myn and mean, and I'll be running them against the GCPS. We're using all the contents of the starter box, making two lists at approximately 160 points for both sides. We're going to be playing Scenario 2 from the rulebook, Scour. Both players have a cube by their deployment zone designated as their cache cube. In this game, we are using 12 instead of 8 items. The victory point target for this game is 16, and players score victory points in the following ways. You get 2 victory points for locating an intel item as normal, and you get 2 victory points for recovering items. To do this, items are picked up first as normal, and then each player has a free action for models in their cache cube to deposit. From round 4 onwards, victory points are also scored for killing models as usual. So items are placed and then the teams deploy. I deploy first and go first, having won the recon role, but the GCPS have models with aerial deployment, so they do that sneakery next, and then I reshuffle 2 models from the recon phase. But with that done, let's take a look at the teams taking part, starting with my Veer-Myn. So I'm just using the starter box for Deadzone 3rd edition, which comes with the pack leader as the leader choice for the Veer-Myn forces. This guy cuts an imposing figure, hitting on 4s with razor claws, dishing out AP1 attacks with Frenzy 2 and a +1 size against all the GCPS, makes him a pretty reliable melee threat. Next up, I build 2 Nightmares, my biggest and bruisiest rats on the team. I have 1 close combat guy armed with twin combat drills and 1 with a heavy chem thrower. Moving on to the little guys now, and I have 4 Stalkers. These are my assault guys, armed with ray pistols, but more importantly, with a 4+ in combat. Most of the Veer-Myn are pretty mobile, so they should be able to grab some items. Next up from the little guys are the Crawlers. Again, I have built 4 of these from the list, less combat focused than their stalking cousins. These guys are a 5+ to fight, but their ray guns make them a much better all-round ranged option. But by far, packing the most ranged punch are the Malignuses, the Maligni. I built 2 of these guys from the kit, one with a heavy ray gun, the other with a chem thrower, and with a 5+ on ranged combat, these guys are my squad's marks rats. So that's it for the Veer-Myn, so let's look at their opponents, the GCPS. I think there's a few options you can build from the starter kit, but I went for the Corporation Marine Lieutenant. Comms Link is a decent ability if you're able to give this guy some good lines of sight to help those grenade launchers hit their targets. Speaking of grenade launchers, next up for the GCPS are 4 Corporation Veterans. There's a bunch of different loadouts here. We have 2 grenade launcher specialists, 1 flamer, and 1 with a laser carbine. There are obviously different ways you can build these from the starter kit, but I felt like this gave me a nice mix of the special weapons. Next up are 5 Rangers, most famous for their jump packs of course. There are 4 armed with laser carbines to keep it nice and simple, and 1 flamer thrown in as well. That brings us on to the Living Legends section, and the starter kit for the GCPS gives you Teresa Washington, also sporting a jump pack to keep pace with the Rangers. She's a badass in combat and ranged combat. So that's it for both of the teams facing off today. It's a classic starter kit throwdown, so let's move into turn 1 and kick things off. It's the start of the turn, so we're going to roll the command dice. Both tacticians are still kicking, so it's 3 dice plus 1, starting with the Veer-Myn. Getting a shoot and 3 assaults, not going to re-roll any, and then it's over to the GCPS. Bit more of a diverse roll, it's 2 plus 1 models, a shoot and an assault. Also, my opponent chooses not to re-roll. Let's get started. The forces of the Veer-Myn stalk cautiously into Sector 4. Their recent recon squad advised of a resource-rich deserted hab block, and it does not disappoint. As the Veer-Myn scour the site for loot, the growing sound of jetpacks alerts them. Looking up to the skies, an assault squad of the GCPS attack. Both sides must now fight for the valuable resources as the battle begins. Deploying a little too close to the enemy lines, actually a mistake here. Aerial deployment means you must leave at least 2 cubes between an enemy model, but we counted vertical distance instead. Anyway, this means the pack leader charges in to attack the ranger. Plus 2 dice for the pool for charging and being bigger, getting 3 hits. Doesn't land the exploding 8, but does get 2 rerolls from Frenzy, getting both, so that's 5 hits in total at AP1. The Ranger opts to attack back, getting just 1 hit, meaning the pack leader would deal 4 damage. The Ranger has 1 armor, but with AP 1 that means nothing, so it's a dead Ranger. First blood to me. I do sort of get carried away with the narrative side of the game that plays in my head, and I do forget how brutal combat is in Deadzone, and this guy is now a little bit wide open. A fact of which my opponent also sees, repositioning this Ranger to obtain the item and also targeting my pack leader with his laser carbine. He has a clear shot on the high ground, so this is going to be 6 dice to throw at this attack. Gets 2 hits and an 8, and also with weight of dice 1 rerolls, getting another hit, and then rerolls the exploding 8, which explodes again, and then gets another hit for a total of 6. Yikes. I fail all of my saves, which is, you know, just great, obviously. So even with armor, that's 5 damage going through, killing me twice over. This is a great, humbling start to the game. With my pack leader unceremoniously cut down in his prime, my opponent spends a +1 model dice, and he gets to move again. My opponent activates this Ranger and does the old item grab shuffle to pick up the item. Back to me, and I move Captain Combat Drills into this cube to pick up an item. Kinda feels like playing Supermarket Sweep. Another shuffle from my opponent to pick up another item. Back to me, and I'm going to sprint my other Nightmare onto this stack and then spend my shoot command dice to shoot for free, targeting the Ranger at the top of the tallest stack. The Chem Thrower has the It Burns rules, which means the attack is a 3 dice roll without modifiers. I get 1 hit. The Ranger then rolls a 3 dice survive test. Makes 2 saves, so no damage goes through, but he will be on fire. Another item shuffle from my opponent, and I think we realized they deployed badly, as to pick up an item you have to either move through or reposition in a cube. Anyway, back to me, and I race a crawler up the board. Back to the GCPS, and one of those menacing grenade launchers repositions. Back to me, and one of my stalkers races forward towards one of the items, looking to pick it up in the next turn. Back to the GCPS, and the other grenade launcher veteran climbs on top of this stack. Then they play another command dice to activate this Ranger, who does a little shuffle to pick up the item, and he also takes a pop at one of my nightmares. The walkway obscures the shot a little, so this will just be 3 dice looking for 5s. Gets an 8 and rerolls the weight of dice, but it fails. The 8 explodes, and again, and gets a hit, so that's 4 in total. I roll my survive check for the nightmare, failing the first 2. I find the next dice, and it's a fail as well. I use a reroll and get 1 at least, so that and the armor means that only 2 wounds go through, and I have 3, so I live with 1 wound remaining. That was unpleasant. Back to me, and I move this stalker through the item, picking it up on the way, and then continuing my move onto my cash cube, where I deposit said item for 2 victory points. A booyah. This veteran moves forward to get good line of sight down the board. Back to me, and I'm going to race this crawler forward to kind of be close to that item for next turn, hopefully if he lives. The veteran with flamethrower is going to move forward, joining the party in the middle of the board. I'm always surprised at how fast the Veer-Myn are. I'm going to move this Malignus out here and shoot at the Ranger that just grabbed the item in the center. It's heavy ray gun time. Got clear line of sight, so it's going to be 5 shots, hitting on 5s. Gets 3 hits,
the number of the beast,
but misses the weight of fire reroll. Rolls an 8 on the survive tech, but doesn't get the explosion, so even with armor, there's AP 1, that is just a dead Ranger. Gotta love a heavy ray gun. It's another dead Ranger, which almost makes me forget I threw away my pack leader, and then it's back to the GCPS. Just a little shuffle forward and advance from the lieutenant to reposition. Then it's back to the Veer-Myn, and I'm going to throw another one of my crawlers forward into the center of the board. Speeding things up, and I move another couple of units because no more for the GCPS, and I uncover an item, and it's intel, so that's 2 victory points. The rest of this turn is just me moving models, so let's get this done. This is what it now looks like with all my models moved. And that's the end of turn 1, so let's have a quick look at what's happened. Both sides have surged forward to claim the objectives, the items. The GCPS helped with their aerial deployment. Only a few deaths this turn, and here are where the items currently sit. A slight rules blunder from my opponent on how items are picked up means that he's been a lot more static than I think he wanted to be this turn, but I have lost my pack leader, so I'm down to 3 command dice at the start of the turn, which is not great. I am, however, ahead in the points, so it's not all bad. Let's get into turn 2. Back into turn 2, and we're going to start with the command dice rolling, starting with the Veer-Myn and their pitiful 3. Getting 2 advances and 1 shoot, and the GCPS roll, getting 2+1 dice and 2+1 model. Then I re-roll 1 advance, getting an assault, and we start turn 2. Starting with the player that finished first last turn, and this ranger is going to grab his item and sprint out of the danger zone. Using 2 command dice to move another model and add 1 die to its attack pool, this veteran is going to shuffle to get line of sight on the Malignus and fire his laser carbine. Clear line of sight with the extra dice is going to be 6 dice, looking for 5s. Gets 3 hits but has a weight of fire reroll, but it doesn't go off. The Malignus has a 5-up save and rolls its survive check, only making 1, spends a command dice to reroll, but it's still a fail, and with no armor and 2 wounds, that means the Malignus is taken out of action. Bye bye heavy ray gun. It's a personal tragedy. I've lost my heavy ray gun, but it's back to me now, and I'm going to activate. I'm going to move this guy. He's going to move on to the item, pick it up, and then continue his movement to get back to the drop zone. With much delight, my opponent activates the grenade launcher and targets this cube. It's an indirect weapon targeting a cube out of its line of sight, so on a 3 dice check I'll need 2 successes, so 2 5-ups or it'll scatter. And I just get 1, so it's going to scatter. My opponent rolls on the scatter table and gets a 3, so it's actually going to hit my combat nightmare, which is an absolute nightmare for me. It's frag 3, so it's a 3 dice check looking for 4 ups, gets 3 hits and 2 8s, which both hit, so it ends up as a strength 5 frag blast. Now it's a survive roll. I make 1 save and I have 1 armor built in, but this still ends up as 3 damage, which is exactly the wounds I have, so it's enough to kill my nightmare. I do the old item shuffle to pick up this item, and for some reason I fail to see that this guy is actually in range of my pistol, so it's back to the GCPS. This time targeting my remaining Malignus, the grenade launcher moves into range and fires, indirect but has line of sight, so only needing 1 success on the check. Gets 2 successes and 1 explodes, getting a 3rd, so it definitely hits, and we move on to the frag 3 check, needing 4 ups with a 3 dice. Gets 2 and 1 is an 8, which gets a 3rd hit. Survive roll now for the Malignus and gets 2 successes, so that's going to be 1 damage going through, and then it's going to scatter. So he's still going to be alive with 1 wound, but on the roll of a scatter die, he's going to be knocked back and pinned in the new cube. And here is where the Malignus ends up. My opponent spends a command dice to activate another operative and then yeets Theresa Washington towards their cache cube. Back to me, and I send a stalker to pick up the dropped item from the nightmare and then head to my cache. My opponent activates a ranger and moves him towards his own cache carrying an item. I activate a crawler and move him onto this dropped item, pick it up and then continue moving, trying to get away. A bold move from my opponent as they move their lieutenant towards the combat. My stunned Malignus is going to stand up and shuffle forwards. My opponent passes, so I move the stalker to pick up this item and continue his move towards my cache. Activating the veteran flamethrower guy, he advances 1 cube and then targets my item holding crawler here and flames him. Rolling an It Burns check, it's going to be 3, getting 1 hit, but it's an 8 and it does explode into a 2nd hit. Now for the survive roll. Rolls a save and an 8, which does explode into a 2nd save, so that's no damage, but it will be on fire. Back to me and the Veer-Myn, and I really don't like these flamethrower guys, so I'm going to move one of my crawlers forward and take a pop at him with my ray gun. Pew pew, baby. Clear line of sight, so it's going to be 5 die looking for 6s. Gets just 1 and it's an 8, so I get another and that's 2. Get a weight of dice reroll, but it doesn't come off. Makes 1 save, but it is an 8 and that turns into 2 magically, so he's fine. My opponent activates this guy on the top who is on fire, so we have to see how long it takes him to pat out the flames. The fire gets 2 successes and the ranger makes 2 saves, so on a draw the fire is put out with any damage and the model activates as normal. Boo! And he moves here. Back to me, and my crawler is going to reposition in this cube so he can get uninterrupted sight to the lieutenant, and then he's going to fire with his ray gun. Because of his reshuffle, it's a clear shot, so 5 dice looking for 6s. Gets 3 hits, 1 is an 8, weight of fire fails, and the 8 does get another hit. Onto the survive roll, and only 1 is made. Spends a command dice to reroll and gets 2, which means with armor, that's just 1 damage going through. But the Veer-Myn use a shoot command dice to shoot again. Gets 2 hits and gets a weight of fire reroll, but it's still just 2. Makes 1 save on the survive roll, and with armor, that means there's no damage going through, so he's down to 1 wound, but he lives. Back to me and the Veer-Myn, and I'm going to move this stalker forward to join this bubble of ratmen. The bubble of ratmen. Final activation, and I'm moving my remaining nightmare off this stack so he's not quite so much of an open target. And that's it, that's the end of turn 2, so let's have a quick recap at what happened. Quite a lot of movement around the board, with teams now heading back to their cash cube to score points. 2 more deaths, both on my side, which is never fun, but it's still all to play for. Here are where the items currently are. I honestly think I'm in a great position. I've got the lead in the points and I grabbed a bunch of items already, so let's head in to turn 3. We're in turn 3 now, and it's time to roll the command dice. I start first and I get 3, which is advanced shoot and special order, which I reroll immediately, getting assault. My opponent then rolls their 4, getting advanced +1 model and 2 +1 dice. My opponent goes first, activating this ranger, moving to the cash cube and then cashing in that item for 2 victory points. I spend an advanced command dice to move this crawler forward so he can get clear line of sight on the lieutenant. Clear line of sight is going to be 5 dice looking for 6s. Get 2 8s and there's a weight of fire reroll. And I get a hit with that, and then I roll my 2 exploding 8s, getting 1 more 8, but that's it. The survive roll now for the lieutenant, and he makes 2, is going to use a command die to re-roll 1 and gets it, so with armor, no damage. So I'm going to use a command dice to shoot again. It's a disaster, nothing hits, but weight of fire nets me 1 hit, but he makes his save like an absolute and I have nothing. With the crawler's remaining move, I'm just going to sprint back home. I guess I wasn't very subtle about what I was targeting, so my opponent moves the lieutenant out of line of sight. It's back to me, and I'm going to move my chem-throwing Malignus forward to target the veteran grenade launcher and T. Washington in 1 conflagration. For It Burns weapons, you make 1 roll against all the models in a cube. I hit with 2, so that's 2 successes. The veteran gunner makes 3 passes, ends up as 4 with an exploding 8, and T. Washington doesn't make any saves. She has armor reducing the damage to 1, so she is alive, and both of them will be on fire. This veteran with laser carbine is going to reshuffle in his cube and then fire at my on-fire crawler with item.
Your command when he's down, why don't you?
5 dice, and it's just the 1 hit, but there is a weight of fiery roll, and it's still just the 1. Onto my survive roll, and I make 2, so he's a-okay. Back to me, and I'm going to move this guy down towards the cash cube. Back to my opponent, and he's going to activate this ranger with laser carbine, and he's going to target my 1 wound remaining Malignus. Ruh-roh. It's clear lines of sight, so this is going to be 5 dice to throw at this. After weight of fire, that's 4 hits. I roll my survive check, and after a number of exploding 8s, I manage to make 3 saves, but it's not enough. He only had 1 wound remaining, and that's exactly how many wounds he takes, so my last Malignus is taken out of action. With the ranger's remaining action, he's then going to advance towards the cash cube. With plans to throw some heavy chems later in this game, I sprint forward with my last nightmare. The veteran grenade launcher activates and rolls to see if the fire does any damage. It doesn't get any hits, so it doesn't really matter what he rolls, because on a draw, he puts the fire out and activates as normal, so he's going to move forward. He's then going to target this cube, which is just out of line of sight, and fire. Classing this as out of line of sight, so needing 2 successes and only gets 1, so it scatters into this square, hitting no one. My opponent uses the +1 models and activates the other grenade launcher and fires again, targeting the same square. It's out of line of sight, so needs 2 successes and gets them, so it's a direct hit. Frag 3, so it's going to be 3 die looking for 4 ups, and the first one is against the Nightmare. Only gets the 1 hit, but now it's time to roll their survive dice. Gets 1, and the second doesn't explode, but it's enough to avoid damage, and the Stalker also gets a save, so no damage, but they will get moved. The Nightmare gets thrown into this cube, and the Stalker gets slammed into the wall here, so the wall has to roll an attack. Just gets the 1 hit, and the save is made, so he stays standing in that cube. Back to me, and I'm going to try and take out the grenade launcher, so I'm going to move my guy here and fire with his ray gun. Not quite clear line of sight, so it's only 3 dice. Getting 1 hit with weight of fire, still just the 1, and he makes 1 save, so nothing happens. What a load of nothing. Rubbish. T. Washington is going to activate, but needs to see if she's still on fire. The fire gets 2 hits, and T. Wash only gets 1 save. She has 1 armor, so wouldn't get killed, but if the fire wins, her activation ends immediately, so my opponent uses a command dice to re-roll, getting enough saves, so now can activate as normal. First thing she's going to do is shoot my fallen Nightmare. With clear line of sight, this is going to be 5 shots hitting on 4s with weight of fire 1, and that ends up as 3, even with the exploding 8. My Nightmare's survive roll gets 2, and with his armor, that means no damage is going through, so he's A-OK. So no damage was done, but the weapon has knockback, so the Nightmare's moved away. She then moves onto the cash cube and deposits an item for 2 victory points, bringing the scores level at 4 apiece. Back to me, and I'm going to move forward with one of my Stalkers, and I'm going to target the veteran with Flamethrower and try and take him out with my Ray Pistol. Clear line of sight, but with no weight of fire reroll, that's just going to be 2 hits. On the survive roll, and only 1 save is made, but they do have 2 wounds apiece, so he's still going to be alive, but he's 1 wound down. My opponent moves one of his rangers closer towards their cash cube carrying an item. I move one of my Stalkers carrying an item towards my cash cube as well, and then the veteran Flamer targets a Stalker ahead of it and flames him. 3 dice for the It Burns test, getting 2 successes even with the explosion, and then onto the survive roll. None are made, but I'm going to use a reroll because I want him to live, and I do pass, so that's 1 wound down, but he lives with 1 wound remaining. And of course he's on fire. The veteran Flamethrower then moves behind this wall. The GCPS are done, so I'm going to move 2 of my operatives onto the cash cube and deposit items, getting 2 victory points each, bringing my score up to 8, and then this guy is going to make sure he's not on fire anymore. The fire gets 2 successes, and miraculously I get 2 successes on my save, even with the explosion, but he's not on fire, so he can move as normal. And he's going to do that, he's going to leg it towards my cash cube. And with that sprinting, it's the end of turn 3, so let's have a quick look at what's happened in the turn. A lot of operatives returning to their cash cube to score those victory points, the Veer-Myn really taking advantage of their speed, and only 1 death. It's on my side, but that's still pretty good going. Here's where the remaining items are, as we're going to move into turn 4. So in turn 4 onwards, players will get victory points for taking enemy models out of action. Starting with the GCPS command dice roll, and they get 2 assaults, a shoot and an advance, and then we move to the Veer-Myn and they end up with 2 1 models and 1 dice. It's an aggressive start. The grenade launcher advances forward and targets the cash cube and fires. Out of line of sight, so we're going to need 2 successes. Gets 1 and it's an explosion, but it's still just a 1, so it's going to scatter. And unfortunately, hits no 1. I'm personally devastated. I'm going to move a Stalker with item onto the cash cube and deposit for 2 victory points, and then T-Wash is going to move forward and again target my Nightmare. Clear line of sight onto the target, and with a weight of fire reroll, that ends up as 3 hits, and with an exploding 8, that ends up as actually 5 hits. It takes me a while to roll 3 dice, embarrassingly long, and I only make 1 save, and that means it's a dead Nightmare. So no more Nightmares, I will focus on the points. I'm going to move this model onto the cash cube, getting 2 victory points, then spend a command die to move another model and get him out of the way over here. My opponent moves a model onto the cash cube, scoring 2 victory points, and I do the same. My opponent then passes, so then I make another move with this guy and fire at his grenade launcher veteran. Bear in mind, round 4 now, this guy is worth 2 victory points if I can kill him. It's an obnoxious roll, I know that. I hit with everything and I get 2 8s, and it basically ends up as 6 hits. My opponent also makes a decent roll, getting an 8 and a 6, so that's only 2. That's 4 damage going through, so he is double dead. So with that kill, I do hit the 16-point mark, but my opponent has until the end of the turn to also hit it. I then use another command die to get another one of my models out of the way so I can't be shot. My opponent moves onto his cash cube again, scoring another 2 victory points, and it's back to me, and I again move and model out of line of sight. So the grenade launcher could still hurt me. He can target my cash cube, and there's 3 people in there, so that's going to be a decent amount of points, and that's what he's going to do. Doesn't get what he needs to hit the cube, and it does scatter into an unoccupied square, so nothing happens. Back to me, and I'm moving another model away from his targeting sites, and then it's back to him, and my opponent moves this veteran guy out to target one of my models and fires with his laser carbine. I think we've totted up the chances in our heads and he can't win, so it feels like this kill is just to spite me, really. What a mean man. Clear line of sight, and they do have a way to fire reroll, and there's some explosions in there, but it ends up as basically 5 hits. I make 2 saves, which turns into 3 saves, which turns into 4 saves, and then we have to change the dice because we lose count. Anyway, after all of that, it ends up as just 1 wound, so my guy survives. Activating the last of my guys, and I need to see if he's on fire. Let's have a look at what the fire strength ends up as. This isn't nice. It ends up as a strength 5 fire. I only make 1 save, so the fire actually kills before I can do anything. It's then back to my opponent, and to be fair, he just arbitrarily moves some models around the board because there's not much he can do at this stage, and he's unable to get any points scored, and this is how it ends. It's going to be 16 points to the Veer-Myn and 11 points to the GCPS, so it's a Veer-Myn victory. Let's have a quick look at what happened in the last turn. I spent most of my time scoring victory points with items and then getting my guys out of line of sight so I wasn't giving any points away. Not a lot of deaths this game, it felt like we were both focused on points, but anyway, it was a great close match. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you my patrons who helped keeping everything running, and I'll see you in the next video.